Hey everyone, welcome back. Before I get into this one, I just want to say this story still keeps me up some nights. I've gone back and forth about whether to share it because, honestly, part of me still doesn't want to believe it happened. But it did. Every bit of it. This was told to me by someone very close to me, and I've done my best to tell it the way she told it to me. Because I think people need to hear this. I think people need to know that stuff like this actually happens out there, in places where you think you're safe just because there's nobody around. Alright, let me just get into it. So this girl, I'm going to call her Anna, she's someone I've known for years. Smart, independent, the kind of person who doesn't scare easily. A couple of years back, Anna was going through a rough patch. She'd left her job, not on the best terms, and she had this gap of a few weeks before starting the next one. She wasn't the type to just sit around and binge TV shows. She needed to move, to breathe, to get out of her own head. So she came up with this idea to do a solo backpacking trip. A real one. Not some weekend thing at a popular campground with showers and picnic tables. She wanted deep wilderness. The kind of place where you don't see another person for days. I remember when she first told me about the plan. We were having coffee and she pulled up this map on her phone, zooming in on this green blob in the middle of nowhere. She had this look on her face, this kind of quiet determination, like she'd already decided and was just informing me. I told her it sounded intense. She said that was the point. She found this trail system up in the Pacific Northwest. I won't say exactly where because she asked me not to, and honestly, after hearing what happened, I understand why. But picture dense, old-growth forest, the kind where the trees are so tall and thick that the canopy blocks out most of the sky. Even on a bright, sunny day, the forest floor sits in this permanent kind of twilight. The air smells like wet earth and pine needles, and something ancient. Something that reminds you that humans weren't really meant to be there. At least, not alone. The trail she picked was a long one, about 40 miles total, looping through some of the most remote sections of the forest. It was designated backcountry, which meant there were no facilities, no running water, no cell service. The campsites out there were just small clearings along the trail, marked with a post and maybe a fire ring made of rocks. Rangers came through once in a while, but it wasn't regular. The campsites existed mostly for bear safety and to keep people from just setting up anywhere and trashing the place. You had to reserve them in advance, so the Park Service had a record of who was out there and for how long. Anna did everything right. She was careful about it. She reserved 2 campsites, one at the 12-mile mark and another at the 26-mile mark. She packed proper gear. She had a satellite emergency phone, a water filter, bear spray, a good knife, layers for cold nights. She'd done shorter solo hikes before, but nothing this remote and nothing this long. Still, she felt ready. She told me later that the whole point was to challenge herself, to prove she could do something hard on her own. And she could. That was never the problem. The trailhead was at the end of a long gravel road, about 2 hours from the nearest town. When she pulled into the small dirt parking lot, hers was the only car there. That didn't surprise her. It was off-season, late October, and the weather had already turned cold at elevation. Most people had packed up their hiking boots for the year. She signed the trail register at the wooden kiosk, checked her pack one last time, and started walking. The first couple of hours were beautiful. The trail wound through a valley along a creek, the water clear and cold, tumbling over mossy rocks. The trees rose up on either side like the walls of a cathedral. Ferns grew thick and green along the forest floor, and every now and then a shaft of sunlight would break through the canopy and light up a patch of ground like a spotlight on a stage. Birds called somewhere high above, but she couldn't see them. It was peaceful. It was exactly what she wanted. But there was also this stillness to it. Not just quiet, still, like the forest was holding its breath. Anna said she noticed it early on, within the first hour. The deeper she went, the heavier the silence became. No wind, no rustling, just the sound of her own boots on the dirt and the occasional crack of a twig underfoot. She said it felt like walking into a room and realizing everyone had just stopped talking, like something was watching and waiting for her to leave. She shook it off. That's just what deep wilderness feels like, she told herself. You're not used to it. Your brain is looking for noise because that's what it's wired to expect. She kept walking. Mile after mile, the trail climbed higher, the trees grew thicker, and the creek faded to a whisper behind her. She didn't see a single other person the entire day. Not one. No other hikers, no trail runners, nobody. Just her and the forest, and the sound of her own breathing. She reached the first campsite around midday. It was a small, flat clearing about 50 yards off the main trail, tucked between a cluster of old cedars. The fire ring was there, half filled with ash from whoever had been there last, probably weeks or months ago. She set up her tent, filtered some water from a nearby stream, and made a simple lunch. Then she just sat there for a while, leaning against her pack, looking up at the canopy. The branches moved so slowly up there, creaking and swaying in a breeze she couldn't feel on the ground. It was like the trees were alive in a way she hadn't noticed before. Breathing, shifting, watching. She spent the rest of the afternoon reading and resting. The campsite was isolated. The nearest designated site was at least a mile away in either direction, and with nobody else on the trail, it felt like she had the entire forest to herself. Which, for the record, was the point. But Anna told me there's a difference between choosing to be alone and realizing you actually are alone. Like, truly, deeply alone. Miles from the nearest road. Miles from the nearest person. No phone signal. No way to call for help quickly. That realization settled over her slowly, like fog rolling in, and by the time the sun started going down, she was feeling it. She cooked dinner, cleaned up properly to avoid attracting bears, and crawled into her tent just after dark. The temperature dropped fast. She could hear the forest settling in for the night. Small creaks, the distant hoot of an owl, something scurrying through the underbrush. Normal sounds, forest sounds. She zipped her sleeping bag up to her chin and closed her eyes. But sleep didn't come right away. She lay there listening to the forest, and the forest was loud in its quietness. Every tiny noise felt amplified. A branch snapping somewhere far away sounded like a gunshot. The rustle of leaves could have been anything. A mouse, a bird settling in, or something much larger moving with purpose. The tent walls fluttered in the faintest breeze, and the fabric made this gentle tapping sound against the poles that kept pulling her back from the edge of sleep. She told me that was the first moment she truly felt the weight of being alone. Not lonely, alone. There's a difference. Loneliness is missing people. Being alone in a place like that is understanding, on a bone-deep level, that if something happens, there's nobody coming. Nobody even knows something happened. You are entirely responsible for your own survival, and the forest doesn't care about you one way or the other. She slept well, eventually, actually. deep and solid, which surprised her. But sometime in the middle of the night, she guessed it was around 2 or 3 in the morning, she woke up. Not with a start, not in a panic, just opened her eyes in the dark and lay there, listening. Something had woken her, and then she heard it. Footsteps coming down the trail. They were soft and steady, the rhythmic crunch of boots on packed dirt. Someone walking at a normal pace, not hurrying, not trying to be quiet, just walking down the trail at 2 or 3 in the morning. Anna lay perfectly still. Her heart picked up, but she told herself it was nothing. Maybe another hiker who'd started late and was trying to reach a campsite further ahead. Maybe someone with a headlamp who preferred hiking at night when it was cooler. There were explanations, reasonable ones. She listened as the footsteps grew closer, past what she estimated was her turnoff to the campsite, and then slowly faded into the distance ahead on the trail. She waited another 10 minutes, maybe 15, just lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling of her tent. Then she rolled over and went back to sleep. She told me later that she almost didn't think about it again, almost dismissed it entirely. But something about it stuck with her. Not the footsteps themselves. People hike at weird hours sometimes. It was the fact that there had been no light. No headlamp beam sweeping through the trees. No flashlight glow. Someone had walked right past her campsite in the pitch dark, in the middle of a dense forest, without any light at all. She woke up early the next morning, just as the first grey light was filtering through the canopy. The forest was cold and damp, the kind of cold that seeps into your joints and makes you move slowly. She boiled water for coffee, ate a quick breakfast of oatmeal and dried fruit, and started breaking down camp. As she packed, she glanced down the trail in both directions. Empty. No sign that anyone had passed through. No fresh boot prints in the soft dirt near her site. Nothing. She chalked it up to a half-dream. Maybe she hadn't really heard footsteps. Maybe it was an animal. A deer, maybe, or an elk moving through. The mind does funny things at 3 in the morning when you're alone in the wilderness. She finished packing, shouldered her bag, and headed out for the second leg of the hike. This section was longer, 14 miles instead of 10, and it climbed significantly. The trail wound up through switchbacks, crossing small ridge lines and dropping into hollows where the trees grew so close together that the trail was barely wide enough for one person. The deeper she went, the older the forest got. Some of these trees had to be hundreds of years old, their trunks wider than cars, their bark thick and deeply grooved. Moss hung from everything. The ground was carpeted in fallen needles so thick that her footsteps made almost no sound. And the silence. God, the silence. Anna said it was the kind of silence that has weight to it. You don't just hear it, you feel it pressing in on you from all sides. No birds singing. No insects buzzing. Just the occasional distant creak of a tree swaying in some upper wind, and the sound of her own breathing, which started to feel too loud, like she was announcing her presence to something that was trying very hard to stay hidden. She hiked all day without seeing anyone, not a soul. 14 miles of trail, and she was the only human being on it. She kept telling herself it was fine. Off-season, remote trail. This was normal. But normal started to feel like a word that was losing its meaning out there. There were moments during that hike where the forest felt alive around her in a way that wasn't comforting. The trees seemed to lean in overhead, their branches intertwining so tightly that the sky was just occasional fragments of grey visible through the canopy. Sometimes a gust of wind would move through the high branches, and the entire canopy would sway and groan, this deep wooden sound that vibrated in her chest. But down on the ground, nothing moved. The air was completely still. It was like being at the bottom of a deep ocean while a storm raged at the surface. And there was this feeling she couldn't shake. She described it to me as being aware of the space behind her, like a pressure on the back of her neck. She'd stop walking sometimes, just to listen. And the silence that rushed in when her footsteps stopped was almost physical, thick, watchful. She'd stand there for 10 or 15 seconds, hearing nothing but her own pulse, and then start walking again with this nagging sense that the moment she moved, something else had stopped moving too. She tried to rationalize it. Humans evolved as prey, she told herself. Our brains are wired to detect threats, even when there aren't any. Being alone in a dense forest triggers that ancient wiring. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean someone is out there. But the body doesn't listen to logic. The body listens to instinct. And her instincts were starting to scream. She reached the second campsite late in the afternoon, just as the light was starting to change from pale gold to amber. This side was even more isolated than the first, deeper in the forest, higher in elevation, surrounded by massive old-growth trees that towered above like dark pillars. The clearing was small, and the canopy was so thick that even with the sun still technically up, the camp was already dim. She set up her tent quickly, wanting to get the fire going before full dark. As she worked, she kept glancing over her shoulder. She couldn't help it. There was nothing there, just trees and shadows and silence, but the feeling of being watched was stronger now. It had been building all day, this low-level hum of unease in the back of her skull, like a smoke detector with a dying battery. Faint, but persistent. Impossible to ignore. The fire helped. Fire always helps. Something primal about it, the way the light pushes back the darkness and the warmth wraps around you like a shield. She cooked dinner, washed her pot in the stream, and settled in by the fire with her journal. She wrote about the hike, the scenery, the silence. She didn't write about the footsteps from the night before. She told me later that writing it down would have made it real, and she wasn't ready for that. Hours passed. She had no hiking to do the next day. This was her layover camp, a rest day before the long hike back out. So she stayed up later than usual, feeding the fire, watching the sparks drift up and disappear into the blackness above the canopy. The forest at night is something else entirely. During the day, you can see the beauty of it, the green, the light, the life. At night, all of that disappears. The trees become dark shapes. The spaces between them become voids. And every sound, no matter how small, becomes amplified by the silence surrounding it. It was around 9, maybe 10 at night when she heard it. Footsteps. Far down the trail coming from the direction she'd hiked in from. The same direction as the night before. Her stomach dropped. She sat up straight and turned to look down the trail. And that's when she saw the light. A small pale glow moving through the trees. A headlamp. It was distant, maybe a quarter-mile back, but it was clearly on the trail and clearly moving toward her. Anna sat there, frozen, watching it. Her mind raced through explanations. Another hiker? A late arrival? Someone who'd reserved the site further up the trail and was just passing through. It happened. People hiked late sometimes. But 2 nights in a row? In the off-season? On a trail where she hadn't seen a single person in 2 full days of hiking? The light kept coming, bobbing slightly with the rhythm of the person's stride, weaving in and out of view as the trail curved between trees. Getting closer, getting brighter. Anna could feel her heartbeat in her throat. She gripped the stick she'd been using to tend the fire and didn't take her eyes off that light. And then it stopped. Just stopped. The light held still, maybe 100 yards away. Close enough now that she could tell it was definitely a headlamp. Close enough that whoever was wearing it could probably see the glow of her campfire through the trees. They just stood there, not moving. The light pointing straight in her direction. Anna didn't move either. She just sat there, gripping that stick, watching, waiting. 5 seconds. 10, 15. It felt like an hour. Then the light shifted. It turned slowly to the left, away from the trail, and began moving into the forest. Not on any path, just straight into the dense trees. The light bobbed once, twice, 3 times, moving deeper into the darkness. And then, maybe 20 seconds after it left the trail, it turned off. Gone. Just like that. No light, no sound, nothing. Like the person had simply been swallowed by the forest. Anna sat there for a long time after that, staring into the dark where the light had disappeared. Her hands were shaking. She told me she kept trying to come up with a reason, any reason that would make it okay. Maybe the person had a campsite out there somewhere. Maybe they were just answering nature's call. Maybe they were shy and didn't want to walk past a stranger's camp at night. But none of it held up. You don't hike for miles in the dark and then just vanish into the woods the moment you see someone else's fire. That's not what normal people do. She told me her mind kept cycling through the same thoughts, like a carousel she couldn't get off. Who hikes at this hour? Who hikes in the off-season on a trail this remote? Who sees another person's fire and deliberately avoids it? In the backcountry, when you see another camper, the normal thing to do is wave, maybe say hello, keep moving. You don't disappear into the trees like you've been caught. And the night before, the footsteps with no light. Had that been the same person, walking past her camp in the dark? Had they known she was there? Had they been looking for her? She wanted to pack up and leave right then. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to move. But it was pitch black. The trail was 14 miles back to her first camp, and God knew how far to the trailhead from there. Hiking alone at night on an unfamiliar trail with someone potentially out there in the trees, that was its own kind of dangerous. She could trip, break an ankle, and then she'd really be helpless. She decided to stay, to keep the fire going, to stay awake and wait for dawn. 6 hours, maybe 7. She just had to make it until first light. She pulled her knife out and set it beside her on the log. She positioned the bear spray within arm's reach. She moved her pack closer, ready to grab and go the moment anything felt wrong. And then she sat there, feeding sticks into the fire, and listened to the dark forest breathe around her. The minutes dragged. She fed the fire obsessively, keeping the flames high and the circle of light as wide as possible. She positioned herself with her back to a large tree so nothing could approach from behind without her seeing it. The forest pressed in around her, dark and vast and utterly silent. Every few minutes she'd hear something. A branch settling, a leaf falling, something small moving through the undergrowth, and her whole body would tense. But each time, it was nothing. Just the forest doing what forests do at night. An hour passed after the light disappeared, maybe a little more. Anna was exhausted but wired. The kind of tired where your body wants to shut down, but your brain absolutely refuses. She was sitting there, staring at the fire, when she heard it. A sound behind her, close behind her, off to the right, just beyond the edge of the firelight. The soft, careful crunch of a single footstep on dry leaves. Her blood went cold. She didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened. Silence. But it was a different kind of silence now. Not the empty silence of an uninhabited forest, but the loaded, held-breath silence of someone trying very hard not to make another sound. Then another crunch. Just one step. Closer. Anna grabbed her flashlight from beside her pack and spun around, clicking it on in the same motion. The beam cut through the darkness like a blade, sweeping across ferns and tree trunks and undergrowth, and then it landed on him. A man, standing right there, maybe 10 yards away. Just standing in the forest, perfectly still, like he'd been planted there. Her breath caught in her chest. The first thing she noticed was that he didn't look like a hiker. No pack, no technical clothing, no boots. He was wearing jeans and a dark jacket, the kind of thing you'd wear to walk to the store, not to hike 14 miles into a backcountry forest. His hands were at his sides. His head was tilted slightly like he was studying her. And he didn't move when the light hit him. That was the part that got her. Any normal person, if you shined a flashlight on them unexpectedly in the dark, they'd flinch or shield their eyes or say something. This guy just stood there, perfectly still, like he was hoping that if he didn't move, she might somehow think he was a tree or a shadow or anything other than what he was. A man standing 10 yards from her camp in the middle of the night in the middle of nowhere. Anna's voice came out sharper than she expected. She shouted at him, asked him what the hell he was doing, why he was standing there, who he was. The man didn't answer right away. He hesitated, and for a second she thought he was about to bolt into the trees and disappear. She could see it in his body, the slight shift of weight, the way his shoulders tensed. He was calculating, deciding. And then something changed. His body relaxed, and slowly, almost casually, he started walking toward her. And he smiled. Not a normal smile. Not the kind of smile that puts you at ease. It was the kind of smile that's assembled on purpose, piece by piece, like someone who's practiced it in a mirror but never quite got it right. Too wide, too sudden. It didn't reach his eyes. Anna took a step back. Her hand found the bear spray on her hip. And then he said her name. Not a guess, not a question. He said it like he knew her, like they were old friends bumping into each other at a coffee shop. Casual, familiar. As if this, him standing in the dark forest at midnight, creeping up on her camp, was the most natural thing in the world. Anna told me that hearing her own name in that moment was the most terrifying thing she'd ever experienced. Not because of the name itself, but because of what it meant. This wasn't random. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't some lost hiker who stumbled onto her camp. This person knew who she was. He'd come here for her, specifically, deliberately. He had followed her into 40 miles of wilderness, and he knew her name. And the thing that terrified her most? She recognized him. Not clearly, not well enough to put a name to his face, but somewhere in the back of her mind, a faint alarm went off. She had seen this man before. She was sure of it. Not as a friend, not as a co-worker, not as anyone she'd ever spoken to. More like a face in a crowd, a figure in the background of her daily life. The guy behind her in line at the grocery store. The person sitting 3 tables away at the cafe. Someone she'd seen but never noticed. Never had a reason to notice. Until now. Everything clicked in her head in the span of about 3 seconds. The footsteps the first night. That had been him. Walking the trail in the dark, no light, trying to find her camp. He must have missed it, walked right past it. Tonight, he'd used his headlamp, spotted her fire, and then turned off the trail to circle around behind her. He'd been waiting in the dark, waiting for her to fall asleep. And if she had gone to bed at a normal time, if she hadn't stayed up by the fire, she never would have heard him. She would have woken up to him standing over her. Or maybe she wouldn't have woken up at all. He wasn't a hiker. He wasn't a backpacker. He was someone who had followed her from home, from her regular life. He'd known about this trip somehow. Maybe he'd been close enough to hear her talking about it, or watched her packing her car, or been tracking her for weeks or months before this. He had driven to the trailhead. He had followed her onto the trail, staying far enough behind to stay invisible. And at night, when she was supposed to be asleep and vulnerable, he came looking. The man was still walking toward her, still smiling that awful, manufactured smile. He said her name again, softer this time, like he was trying to soothe a nervous animal. "Why are you being like this?" he asked, as if she were the one behaving strangely, as if she were being unreasonable. His voice was calm but hollow, like a recording of someone pretending to be human. Anna didn't answer. She was already moving. She scooped up her backpack. She'd never fully unpacked it, some instinct keeping her ready to move. And she backed toward the trail, keeping the flashlight on him and her other hand on the bear spray. She didn't turn her back on him. She didn't take her eyes off him. His smile disappeared, just vanished, like someone had flipped a switch. And the face underneath it was worse. Flat. Empty. His eyes didn't change, didn't blink. He asked her what she was doing. Not angry, not confused. Just this hollow, monotone question like he was logging data. She hit the trail and turned to move. Behind her, she heard him say her name one more time. But this time it wasn't calm. It wasn't friendly. It was a bark, a command, a sound that came from somewhere deep and ugly inside of him, and it hit her like a physical force. She ran. She killed her flashlight and ran as hard as she could down the trail in the dark. Branches whipped at her face and arms. She stumbled on roots, caught herself, kept going. Behind her, she heard his footsteps, fast, heavy, crashing through the underbrush for a few terrible seconds. Her lungs burned. Her legs screamed. She ran. But then the footsteps behind her slowed and stopped. She didn't look back. She kept running for another minute, 2 minutes, until she couldn't hear anything behind her at all. Then she slowed to a fast walk, her heart slamming against her ribs so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She walked the entire night, 14 miles back through the dark forest, following the trail by starlight and occasional flashes of her headlamp when she absolutely had to check her footing. Every sound made her freeze. Every shadow looked like a person. Every creak of a branch could have been a footstep. She kept the satellite phone in her hand, and about an hour into her march, she used it to contact emergency services. She told them everything. Someone was following her in the backcountry. She was hiking out alone. She needed help. The hours that followed were the longest of her life. She told me that walking through a forest at night, alone, knowing that someone might be behind you in the dark, that's a kind of fear that doesn't have a name. It's not panic. Panic is fast and loud and burns itself out. This was something slower, something that sat in her stomach like a stone and made every step feel like it might be her last. Before a hand grabbed her shoulder or a voice called her name from 2 feet behind her. She kept her headlamp off as much as possible. Using it felt like painting a target on herself. But the trail was treacherous in the dark. Roots snaking across the path, rocks hidden under fallen leaves. Places where the trail narrowed to nothing between thick undergrowth. She stumbled more times than she could count. Once, she tripped hard enough to go down on her hands and knees, and she bit her lip to keep from crying out, tasting blood, and then just knelt there in the dark, listening. Nothing. Just the forest. Just the endless, indifferent silence. It took hours. The trail was slow in the dark, and she had to be careful not to twist an ankle or lose her way. But eventually, just as the first pale light of dawn was bleeding through the trees, she saw a figure on the trail ahead and nearly collapsed with fear before she realized it was a park ranger. They'd sent someone in from the trailhead to meet her. She was safe. But here's the thing. Here's the part that still eats at me when I think about it. They went back out there. Rangers, even a few law enforcement officers. They hiked out to that second campsite and searched the surrounding area. They found her tent, still set up. Her fire, long dead. Some of her things that she'd left behind in her rush to leave. But they didn't find him. No trace. No campsite. No discarded gear. No boot prints leading away from the site. Just the mess of the immediate area around her camp. His car wasn't at the trailhead. He hadn't made a reservation in the system. There was no record of him being out there at all. For him to have gotten out of that forest without being seen, he would have had to hike off trail for miles, maybe dozens of miles, through dense old-growth forest with almost no gear, no pack, no proper clothing. In October, at elevation, with near-freezing overnight temperatures. For an experienced backpacker with full gear, that would have been a serious challenge. For some random guy in jeans and a jacket, it should have been close to impossible. Anna moved after that, changed her number, changed her routine, changed everything she could think of. She got a security system installed. She stopped going to the places she used to go. Her regular coffee shop, the gym she'd been a member of for years, the park where she used to run in the mornings. She rebuilt her entire life around the idea that someone was watching, because until she knew otherwise, she had to assume he was. The police took the report seriously, but there wasn't much to go on. A vague description of a man in jeans and a dark jacket somewhere in a massive national forest wasn't going to crack anything open. They checked trail cameras, but there were only 2, both at the trailhead, and neither had captured anything useful during the window in question. The case went cold almost before it was warm. But the thing that haunts her, the thing that keeps her checking her locks at night and looking over her shoulder in parking lots, is that she still doesn't know who he was. She knows she saw him somewhere before. She knows he knew her name, her schedule, her plans. And she has no idea how long he'd been watching her before that night in the forest. The times she'd seen his face before, had those been accidents, coincidences? Or had he been there in the background of her life for weeks, months, longer? And if he made it out of that forest, if he survived those miles of dense wilderness with nothing but the clothes on his back, then he's still out there, somewhere. And he already proved that distance and isolation don't stop him. He followed her into 40 miles of backcountry wilderness. He walked the trail in the dead of night without a light. He stood in the dark outside her camp and waited. What would stop him from doing it again? Anna told me once, after a long silence, that there was a part of her that hoped he didn't make it out. That somewhere in those miles and miles of dark forest, the woods did what she couldn't. That the cold or the terrain or the sheer indifference of nature finished what she didn't have the chance to start. And then she went quiet again. And I didn't ask anything else. Some things don't need more words. Some fears are better left where they are. In the silence between sentences. In the pause before someone changes the subject. In the way a person checks the lock twice before turning off the lights. So yeah, that's the story. I know it's a lot to take in, but I wanted to share it because the world isn't always what it looks like in the daylight. Sometimes the most dangerous places aren't the dark forests or the empty trails. Sometimes the danger is the person standing behind you in line. The face you've seen before, but never thought twice about. The one who's been watching you long before you ever noticed them. Stay safe out there, everyone. And if you ever get the feeling that something's wrong, that gut feeling, that little voice in the back of your head, listen to it. Don't talk yourself out of it. Don't rationalize it away. Anna stayed up by that fire because something in her wouldn't let her sleep. And that might be the only reason I'm able to tell you this story today. I'll see you in the next one.